Good evening and welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Tonight our topic is the preservation of documents that might be critical to a language preservation program. Now usually on this program we talk about preservation in the dynamic sense. You preserve a language in the most fundamental sense by keeping it the language of living people. That's a kind of dynamic preservation, but tonight we're going to be talking about archival preservation, where you might want to save on tape or in writing or videotape records of important songs or stories or conversations or any language-related items. And we're also going to mention photos briefly, since language and culture are most appropriately taught together, and often photos are going to be helpful in your language program. We won't get into some of the new jazzier digital things like recordable CD very much, if at all, or CD-ROM computer kind of preservation. We'll concentrate on audio, video, manuscript, and photos. So my guests tonight are Bob Stovall, who's producer-director at Multimedia Studios here, where we make the Wordpath show. Welcome, Bob. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
He's going to be talking mainly about video. And my other guest is Brad Koplowitz. He's assistant curator at the Western History Collection at the University of Oklahoma and also preservation coordinator for the Bazell Libraries at OU. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you both. Let's start off talking about what I have in mind as the briefest topic, which is audio tape. I think I wanted to make that the briefest because we have you two with expertise in these other areas, first of all. And also, I think most people are familiar with your basic audio tape, and if they're working in any kind of language program, they probably have cassette tapes that they've been using of this sort. Now, there's a broad range of recording equipment you can get. Some are better than others. But most people work generally in this format. Of course, there is a new format that people might want to know a little bit more about, and Bobby, you offered to tell a little bit about the new digital recording.
Well, there are quite a few formats to record audio to, but a thing that's really the price has dropped so people could afford there's two new formats. One is digital audio tape, which a few years ago might have been in the $1,000 range, but is actually now down to about a $500 range or less.
That's about what
project.
I paid for my professional analog recorder 10 years ago, I think. Yeah.
And also the other format is a mini disc, which is a relatively new format, and we really don't know if it's going to live very long, but it is also a form of digital recording that records on kind of a mini floppy disk, so to speak. The digital audio tape is probably a better choice. It's a choice of professionals to use, whether it be music recording, in-studio recordings. If you're going to go out in the field and record somebody, it's definitely a good choice for archiving as well as transferring in the future to new formats that might be digital. So
once you have it in digital format, that's probably the most storable. It's in
right. Once you transfer to a digital format, it's generally in ones and zeros, and about every 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to want to transfer to a new digital format, because formats will keep changing. 50 years from now, we probably won't see any of the formats that are on this show, and we will have transferred.
History,
right.
Well,
and we won't look the same, everything. That's right.
Well, now, if someone is starting from scratch and they don't have any recording equipment, then it sounds like that digital format has become competitive enough that they might want to go ahead and get a digital recorder.
It really has.
Now, it requires a special playback machine too, though, right?
Right. Well, it's kind of like a cassette recorder today. It plays back and records on the same machine, and it has outputs so that, say, you could play back and record it to a VHS tape in somebody's home VCR.
So you can transfer it to another type of format.
Right. You can transfer it to any format. So.
Well, that's interesting to know about, and I think since we don't want to concentrate too much on this tonight, we'll kind of refer people to, consult with a professional audio consultant or a major dealer. You can look in the Yellow Pages in Oklahoma City or Norman and find someone that might be helpful there. But there are a couple of other maybe overall considerations that we could cover briefly. One is accessories. What kind of accessories do people need for just a basic audio recording setup? Audio recording,
well, you can go out and you can buy a cheap microphone, and sometimes, it will pick up sounds from the street, it'll pick up the air conditioner, and sometimes it becomes very hard to hear. You can generally spend $70 to $80 and buy a very nice high-quality microphone that will pick up the person's voice and that voice only, make it very clear and concise, and whatever format you record to, that makes a huge difference. It's like getting, you know, in video terms, which we'll talk about in a little bit, an old, you know, camera that's not even color and a nice color camera that you can buy today. It's really that much of a difference in quality.
Wow.
So a good microphone is very important, probably more important than your recording device. And then just general, a cassette recorder is fine today, like the audio tapes you've shown. And once you
I
get
know
it
as
on
a
there,
linguist, I've done a lot of detailed, you know, analytical work using just regular cassette tapes. And it's generally sufficient, but of course, if you're recording something really precious, you want absolutely the best you can get if you can afford to get that kind of equipment. Okay, and as will be the case in just about any format you preserve anything in, look for bulk prices because there's often a substantial savings on that, right? If you can buy your tapes in lots of 50 or 100, you'll really save substantially.
Definitely, and there's catalogs, and just looking back at magazines, you can find all kinds of good prices on them. So.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, let's move on to video then. I want to spend a more substantial time on that, and of course that's, I'm really pretty keen on video. Of course, I'm working on this video format program here, but it really is very useful in language because with language it's so helpful if you can see the context that the language is spoken in at the same time that you hear it. And video has sound and picture, so it's perfect for that. What can you tell us about, maybe you could introduce us with some of your show and tell items here to some of the different video formats and give us some of the pros and cons of each, a little bit of advice about that.
Okay, yeah, I did bring a little show and tell today. One format that I think everybody's interested in and knows about is VHS. I don't even probably need to show this, but VHS is a good format if it's not something that's extremely important, you know. There's some good VHS cameras that you can get relatively cheap these days, and it's a good sustained format that'll be around for a long time. You know, once again, if you get a fairly as good as a recorder that you can buy, you know, it'll put an image on there that'll last a long time on that. The next one is high 8 or regular 8mm tape, and it's just a small cassette. I think quite a bit of people have seen that
It's
these days.
very comparable in size to the familiar audio cassette, right? A little slightly different size, but similar.
Never put a video cassette in an audio tape player, and never put an audio tape in a video cassette player. But yes, these tapes, 8mm is almost exactly in quality to a VHS. And high 8mm is a lot better quality. It spins a little faster. It's about like VHS and Super VHS are. It's just a little bit better quality if you can get a high 8 camera. And these cameras have come down quite a bit in the price range too. The next format is what Alice uses on her show here, and it is a 3/4 inch format. This is a little harder to probably produce if you're on a limited budget, but if you record on any of those formats and you want to preserve it to a little bit, you know, longer, more durable format for archiving, it might be good to go to a studio or to a dubbing facility and get your footage transferred to one of these cassettes to keep in the future.
How can people locate a dubbing facility? What would you recommend?
Well, I would say in the phone book you could. They're starting to crop up in the strangest of places. A few years ago, when I wanted to duplicate a lot of videotapes, I had to go to Dallas. And in Dallas, there's numerous, you know, they can make thousands of copies in an hour on these speed machines. We actually have one in Norman now that duplicates tapes, and I assume there'll be some spreading up around Oklahoma City. People, CD-ROMs, which we aren't going to talk about, compact disc, audio cassettes, people are finding it so cheap these days to make their own and duplicate it and sell it that it's becoming so cheap that these places are streaming up everywhere.
Okay.
Oh, the other format is beta. This is probably the top primo format to archive to. This is what your news stations use, Channel 4, 5, and 9, to actually master their newscast to. This might be some overkill, and once again, like I said, these formats, you know, 10, 20 years down the line probably won't be around, and whatever you do go to, you probably will in the future have to transfer to the new format. Just to kind of round out, these are digital tape formats, and there is a new format of recording out that is relatively inexpensive. The cameras range from about $2,500 to $3,000, which you might say is a lot of money, but they actually outperform a $70,000 camera in quality. These are the tapes that you record them to, very small.
Gosh, really small.
And they actually have computer chips on them that actually index every scene and keep the date. I mean, everything is done digitally in these tapes. This is just a little bit bigger version of the tape, which will record up to 3 hours on one tape, and it's all These tapes right here are about $20. They will record as good a quality as the beta tape I just showed you, but the beta tape will cost you over $120 for the same tape. And the last format that I'll just kind of briefly mention is DVD, which is a new format, which is just like a compact disc. I hope I'm not glaring at the camera too much. What this format will do is about this Christmas, people will be able to record to these very inexpensively. The home units are actually supposed to start out at about $500 to $600, which is a lot when you think about it. But these discs will be able to be played in a car, in your computer, in your home, on your TV. The disc is the same disc as the one that's in the compact discs are now, except it can hold video and audio at an unbelievable quality. So
I'm telling you, just can't keep up with what's happening these days.
You really can't.
I have never really heard anything about that one yet. Well, thanks. That's great. What about, so in general, if you, suppose you're working in one format, for instance, if someone has a high 8 camera and they decide they want to store some things on the 3/4 inch tape that you talked about, is there any problem going from one to the other? Do you have to go to a professional and get them to copy, or what's the transferability here?
Usually you do have to go to a professional because it's hard to find that equipment. For example, the 3/4 of the beta you can only find in post-production houses or big studios. Generally that can be, sometimes you can find, depending on what it is, you can find people to do it just free if it's an archival and it's for a good purpose and everything. But there's really no problem in transferring between formats at all. Everything has a video out and an audio out, and a video in and an audio in. So between any format, any of the formats I've even shown, even the ones in the future, you should be able to transfer to
so
and
you
from.
can't play any of these on machines for the others, but you can always connect them up with cables. That's
Right.
really not a problem.
Right, and like I said, you know, if 3/4 goes out in a few years, then if you see that starting to happen, transfer your 3/4 inch to the format that is current at that time.
Right.
With the new digital formats, you'll see zero loss.
I'm sorry to be laughing.
Oh,
It
no.
seems like we're always running from advances in technology.
Oh, we
Gotta
are.
Keep up, gotta keep
You
up,
really
you know?
do have to keep up.
Before
but,
what you've got becomes obsolete. I mean, I love
That's
my
true.
old LPs, you know.
That's true.
But I don't know where to get my player fixed anymore, my record player. But, yeah.
It is hard. Yeah, we can't record the LPs
It's really
anymore.
important to stay on top of all this stuff and consult with somebody. What can you give us any idea about when it comes to actually shooting videotape? I know you can't give us a whole lesson in 5 minutes here, but can you give us maybe some of the commonest errors for people that just aren't used to the sort of thinking of the production quality of a video?
Well, for archiving, for what we'd want to do for a show like this, you really, lighting is very important. Of course, you want to see what you're looking at. Yeah. The audio is obviously very important. A lot of the cameras that you see today out for sale in the stores that are relatively cheap, they have a microphone built on them. But that microphone picks up noise in the entire room. And like I've said, a lot of times you'll have something that's very important, but you'll hear air conditioners and everything else in the background. You can barely hear them.
Recording for the show.
Right, it's happened to you a couple times.
When I was taping, I didn't even realize the air conditioner was on. When I came back here to edit, I heard this roar in the background,
amazing.
and it was very hard to understand what the person was saying. Yeah.
And we've heard tapes, you know, from the White Watergate tapes. I don't know what's going on these days, but you hear, you know, FBI surveillance tapes. You hear they have to even decode it on TV and text because you can't really hear what's going on. Well, so lighting being very important and audio being very important. Even if you have to go to Radio Shack and buy a $3, $4 microphone just to get that microphone a little closer. Our microphones are put right here on our show so that they can pick us up directly. If this was on a camera way back there, you could barely hear me. So those are the main two things, and probably the only third thing that really, you know, is really important is your composition of the shot. You know, make sure that you show a good shot of the person. I've seen a lot of videos where people will cut their heads off, or they'll have a head right here, and then they'll have, you know, a huge wall up here with nothing on it. You know, just make generally a pleasing shot. And some people realize and myself, when I'm interviewing people, get in a hurry, and I'll want to just hurry up, and because I'm inconveniencing the person I'm interviewing, it's much better to take that extra 5 or 10 seconds and get your shot how you like it, than have to come back to them later and say we've got to do the whole thing again. So. Yeah.
And finally, what about storage of these tapes once you have them? Where do you store them in order to make sure they will keep as well as possible?
Well, you never put them on a dash of a car. They're in the sun. Generally,
Baking is not good for them.
Right. I like to keep my tapes in a closet. Light doesn't really hurt the videotapes. heat can definitely hurt the videotapes, and bitter cold can hurt them. Don't store them outside. Don't store them outside at all in the summer or winter. And never keep them in the car. If you've shot something and you're driving on a long trip back home, don't put them in the trunk with your camera. Take them out and put them in the front seat with you so that they can get some air around them. But just generally keep them in a room temperature state, and in cases, definitely.
And what about magnetism? I was always told with audio tapes, make sure you never set one down on a speaker or anything else that has strong magnetic
never.
fields. Right.
And it's amazing that what does have magnets in it. You can sit it on top of a television. Telephones have magnets in them. I mean, there's so many things. I basically look around the house, and if I see something electronic, I set it away from it, whether it does or not.
Just to be on the safe side.
Oh, definitely, because I've seen, you get that tape near a magnet, it could be the most valuable tape in the world, and it's gone, whether it's digital or not. So.
Right, no matter how good a tape it started.
Right.
Well, thanks very much. That was a very good, concise bit of information there. We learned a lot. Now, Brad, could you tell us a little bit about, about photograph preservation and manuscripts as well? I understand you brought a little bit of show and tell, and can tell us some of the basics of how to preserve photographs.
Okay. With photographs, you want to be very careful in the handling of the photograph and the negatives. We like to wear white cotton gloves when we handle them by the edges.
So even though you think your hands are very clean, they're just body oils in your skin.
Right, the oils can stain the photograph and lead to deterioration of the photograph, and especially the negative, it would affect the emulsion on it. In the storage of photographs, we like to use acid-free, and I brought some samples here.
Shall I show my sample of a bad way to store photographs? that I
Yeah,
was telling
that
you
might
about?
be a good way to
This is
start
I have several albums like this with just my personal photographs in them. It's one of those kind of things you see in discount stores all the time, and they have a plastic kind of sheet over a sticky page, and you just whomp the photograph on there, and it stays in place. It's supposed to be great. It's marketed as if it were great, but it's actually quite bad, isn't it?
Well, the self-adhesive album is not what we want to use, and on that album you can even see how those the adhesive is yellowing.
Right.
And so that's going to migrate into the backs of the photographs, and the acids will deteriorate the photograph. So what you want to use is a polyester sleeve, usually made of polyester and mylar, and I don't want to get my fingers on the photograph, but this is a real good storage medium. Another type of thing would be an acid-free envelope. If I can slip this one out a little bit. Something like that. They make them in different sizes, and this is an acid-free folder. All of these things will...
So all the way to the folder that you put the envelope in, that you put the photo in, all of that should be as acid-free as possible.
Yes, and even the photo album should be of acid-free paper on the covers, and nothing that would touch even get near the photos would be acidic. Probably the album wouldn't have a metal binder or binding rings, because the metal could rust. That would be another thing. All these kind of materials, the safest way to deal with this is to buy them from archival suppliers.
Where would people find those?
There are a number of them. I'm sorry?
The Yellow Pages again, or are there?
No, not the Yellow Pages. Most of them you have to go mail order, and they almost all of them have 1-800 numbers. Some names are University Products, and Light Impressions, and Hollinger Corporation. All of those you probably just could call up the 800 information and could get in touch, and they're very good about sending out catalogs.
Great. Okay. Sounds very good. That pretty much covers photographs then. What about this, what did you call this process here that you had? This is more getting into manuscripts, I guess. What is that?
This is...
It looks like what the average person would call lamination, but it's not the same.
Right. Lamination is frowned upon because it's not reversible. Lamination involves a Lamintech, which is a adhesive, which it would adhere to the item, so you never can get it out. And we always want to use processes that are reversible. This is an encapsulation, and normally when we encapsulate something, and this is reversible, it can be removed. It has a double-coated tape, special tape that's acid-free, that doesn't come in contact with the document, so we can still remove the document. And then the other thing we try to do is to deacidify the document before we put it in here. And there are a couple different sprays, one of which is Bookmaker spray, and another one is Weito, W-E-I-T-O, named after the preservation god from ancient China, I believe. But a document that's been treated and put into a envelope like this should last just way beyond our lifetimes. So this is a very good way to preserve documents.
So what if you are today creating a document? What kind of attention should you pay to what you use to write with or type with, or what kind of paper you write or type on? Can you give us some tips about that?
If you're wanting to keep the document, it would be good to use an acid-free paper. The medium, I don't know if that would be that important, whether if you typed it or
Ballpoint pen
or used ink. But the paper, and then the main thing would be the storage of it. And there are certain things that will harm paper. Light is something that we can deal with very well. The light that harms paper is the ultraviolet spectrum from fluorescent lights and from sunlight. And so what we want to do is to filter that light using UV filters. And you can buy a UV filter tube that fits over the fluorescent bulbs. And then for windows, we use a UV filtering film like you see in cars and so on. And that will really help with light. With other environmental factors like temperature and humidity, we try to keep the temperature close to 70 degrees. And we don't want a lot of fluctuation. We try to keep it plus or minus 5 degrees. The reason there is, although we can't see it when it's happening, but the fluctuation is causing the molecules in the paper to expand and contract, and over a long period of time, they're going to deteriorate and become brittle and crack. So in temperature, we want to try to keep a stable temperature, and in humidity, the same thing. Humidity, try to keep it around 45 to 50%. And of course, one of the worst things that can happen to us is mold. And so
I saw that happen to a box of my grandmother's books in a damp basement once, and they just had to be thrown out. Maybe someone that was a real preservationist could have rescued them like you, but for all intents and purposes, she just said, "Oh, all my precious books and photos have to be thrown out," and she threw them. You know, it was a shame.
Well, mildew is just a terrible problem, and it's very difficult even for a conservator to deal with, because there's so many types of mold. We use thymol, but it's somewhat effective, but in certain cases it doesn't work very well. But I would say main thing to do is to make sure that what you do, you're sure of when you do it, and that it usually is reversible. Can't think of the other, but did you have any other questions?
I wanted to ask you one or two more things about the photographic side. I brought this, which someone sold me at a photo store years ago, that I've been keeping my photo negatives in something like this. It has a little rose here where you can slip in a strip of negatives. This is for the negatives, and then you can put the whole thing into a notebook. I don't know exactly what substance this is made out of, but does this look like something that's appropriate? Or what do you recommend for negatives?
It's hard to tell just looking at it, but again, you're looking for polyester, mylar, And again, even with negative protectors, knowing who you're dealing with, knowing the supplier, that they carry archival supplies, it's just not good enough to go into a discount store or something and buy this, because you really want to buy the best.
You really want some good advice.
And good advice to make sure that you're going to be able to preserve it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you. I just had a few closing remarks to make, and that is, in general, something that we haven't mentioned yet because we were talking about specific media here. In general, the concept of backing up your documents is very important, whatever format they're in, whether it's a videotape, an audio tape, a photograph, anything that you can have a backup copy of. It's always good to do that, of course. And also, don't forget, a lot of people, like, they back up their computer files on another disk, and then they keep that disk right next to the computer. Well, it doesn't do you a lot of good. It might do you good if something happens to your computer, but if your roof leaks or your house burns down, it does you no good at all. So whenever I'm trying to preserve something really precious, I try to keep at least one backup in another building entirely, and also under similar, the best environmental conditions I can for whatever medium it is, away from magnets if it's a magnetic tape, and away from moisture and mildew and so forth if it's paper or photo. And also, when you're making a videotape, this is some good advice that I've seldom followed because you get in a rush, but it really is advisable when you're making a videotape with important language audio material on it to make an audio cassette tape simultaneously, and then if something happens to the soundtrack on your tape, you have that other soundtrack as a backup. And also, finally, let me just mention again, in any format you're working in, it pays to consult a competent professional and to buy in bulk if you tend to deal in bulk. You can get a substantial discount that way. So I think that I'll have to wrap it up for tonight. That's all the time we have. But thanks again, Bobby and Brad, very much for your very sound advice. And join us next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita.